Hey guys, Eugene Cousins here. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, so today I'm going to be talking about Zack Watkins' experience on the Wingman Challenge. I promised him I'd put some video out on it. He's not a YouTuber. And he sent me a ton of material of amazing and awesome sites that I'm not going to try and put into words because I think that's his privilege to do. Go check out the Facebook page post that he wrote and what he experienced on the Wingman Challenge. He did a fantastic write-ups on his day-by-day experiences. You can go check that out on Nirvana's page, Nirvana Paramotors, or Nirvana North America, or Zack Watkins' personal Facebook page. Learn more about what went through and what happened on this 1,100-mile journey adventure that they did. It wasn't a race, it was an event, and it's about building friendships and camaraderie and learning more about cross-country flying. So hats off to the organizers of this, Scout, Team Fly Halo, the guys that did this. Wonderful initiative, guys. I give you all the praise in the world for doing this, because this is how we create better pilots. This is how we create passion for the sport. Those guys will want to do more and more of these events, even though they had a hard time. Chances are very good that if you've gone into something like this, you're going to come out a better person on the other side, more motivated and more convinced that you can face anything in life. At least that's how it's been for me. All right, let's talk about Zack and his experience. Zack was flying the F200 high hang points cross-country machine. It was the latest creation that we made, and this design has taken an evolutionary run for the last few years. From 2000, well, since I would actually say that from the time that the Maverick was in conception and trying to in design conception, the F-Flight was in conception period as well. There was just no pressure to try and finish it. In 2018, the first low hang points version came out, and Pavel Brezina flew with it on the Icarus 2018, and he podiumed with a machine that has never flown before. He just sent it to Africa, and we did that 1,000-mile journey in 3 days. 3.5 days is how quickly we flew that race. And it was an enormous amount of testing that went through that, through that stomping block, just to make sure that whatever is going to break has to break there. And obviously that gives us some ideas of development in the future. Finally, we were able to finish this beautiful machine, which is a high hang points preferable system for cross-country flying. But this you can get in swing arms, low hang points as well, with a full harness. So it's an option for the guys that do prefer weight shifting. They can fly this as well, get the benefits from it. This obviously saves a bit of weight because you don't have the heavy swing arms, and so it becomes an even lighter package. And weight is something that we are going to be talking about. All right, so you've got a fuel container here at the top, which can also double for a camping or light camping kind of system. It takes 8 liters up here. Take the bladder out, put your own camping gear in. I'm going to do a walk around quickly here. You'll see what I mean. There's the pouch here. You open up the zip and the fuel bladder's in there. A beautiful design. And basically, the only thing that we're trying to accomplish with that is because of the great fuel consumption you get with this machine, you could actually just use your main tank and pack a little bit of light camping gear in there and go on adventures without having any cockpit or anything in front of you. The reserve chute is packed underneath the machine, so it's out of your way, and your ergonomics is just fantastic with this design. All right, so let's talk about Zack's experience. Zack never flew Nirvana before. Zack never had a chance to fly his Dudek Warp 2 before. More than a year ago, he contacted me. We spoke about the numbers. He was flying the Gravity Defiant with the most of 185. And he talked about the physical problems that he was worried about going into the Wingman Challenge, and how what I've been writing about in fuel consumption and weight and all of these things were weighing heavily on his mind. He wanted to know that if he was going to fly in a package like this, if the numbers really were true, and if that was going to make a big difference for him. And fortunately, listen to me, because the results were quite staggering. The results were staggering. He surprised everybody on the Wingman Challenge. I've been completely inundated with emails from dealers and retailers and just customers just asking about how is it possible that this engine can deliver such an enormous amount of an improvement on fuel consumption. So Zack's average fuel consumption on the Wingman Challenge for that 1,100 mile journey was 2.9 liters. That was his average. Now, anybody that does cross-country flying or something like the Icarus or anything like that, when you're heavily loaded and your wing loading is up to the maximum of the wing, would know that you are burning a lot more fuel. The heavier you load yourself, the more fuel you carry, the more oil you have to carry, the higher the RPMs are that you're going to be running. And the end result of that is the fact that you are going to use more fuel. Now, this machine is very different in the sense that it is a computerized engine. Here's the battery of the F-Lite. Guys, gonna have to excuse the wind noise because I'm taking the chance to make this video while the weather's really crap. This is the secret to our success in the sense that we have this and a couple of CPUs that runs the spark of the engine. So the battery goes from this high capacity lithium battery that gives you about 55 to 60 starts and should give you hundreds and hundreds of kilometers worth of flying if it's well charged and there's no problems with it. And so this provides the spark to the engine, and we have full control of the power band. And because of this technology and the variable, there's other secrets I don't want to talk about. It's part of Nirvana's patent, how they've done it. This allows us to get more performance out of the engine. So where the standard semi-nuni would put out something like 6,000, maybe 6,100, 6,200 RPM, this thing can put up to 7,500 RPM depending on what prop you're running. So and the prop that Zack was running was a prop that would put out 6,800 RPM, and with that performance package that he had, he was able to get trim slows. Most of his flying was done trim slows because it was heavily laden, so he was still doing a good speed, and he got 2.9 liters an hour. Now you look at all the other figures from all the other pilots, if they're honest and they've sent it through, it was somewhere between 6 and 9 liters per hour that they were burning. And on the speedrun cup, we see numbers even up to 11 liters an hour if it's the most of 185 that's being used. Now you can get improved numbers on the Polini at 202, especially if you use the smart carb. I have another friend that flew in this, and he got very good numbers as well on fuel consumption, which is great because that is ultimately will determine whether you have a great race or not, because it just reduces the weight that you're carrying. You don't have to carry as much fuel to make those longer flight legs. Why is that important? You can't, with all that gear, do an hour and a half flying, go land, try and refuel, then try and get off the ground as well, because the weather conditions are changing. And so as it gets hotter and hotter through the day, it becomes more thermic. You've got more thermic hotspots and the wind conditions aren't perfect, and you're subjecting yourself to very difficult takeoff conditions, getting out of weird LZs, difficult places. And so you want to have longer flight legs in order to get to your location. And this is what Zack was able to do. Some of his flight legs were up to 7 hours long on a single fuel capacity of 18 liters that he was carrying. And that makes a hell of a difference to a pilot that doesn't have to do fuel stops and having to be trapped on LZs. Okay, so it was a big advantage for him. But I can tell you now, this wasn't plain sailing for Zack. He never flew Nirvana. He never flew the Warp 2 up until the point that it was shipped to the start line, because we had problems with raw materials at Nirvana to try and get this machine finished and in time to get to him. I got the first prototype. Obviously, it has to be thunder tested. I mean, it's got to be absolutely put to the maximum to make sure to find out where the problems are. And I had to design the bladder system that I gave him advice on to prepare in the USA so that he could just arrive and slot it in and get going, get cracking. So he met his Nirvana for the first time at the start line 4 days before the race. 4 days. I mean, that's bravery at a whole different level. I'm one of those meticulous guys that'll test the thing and make sure the gear is perfect before I try and take on an adventure. But he was going to do a 1,100-mile journey with the trust placed in us that the machine was going to be perfect and was going to be fine. It wasn't plain sailing because a couple of items were missing. The second battery, which is to make sure if he lands in a very difficult and weird place and the battery level is low, that second battery would be the Hail Mary to make sure that he can get out of there. Otherwise, he would have to find a charge point. And his 220 charger for the wall socket was also missing from the shipment. And then the reserve container at the bottom of the seat was also missing. So the Nirvana network jumped into action. We were able to get him overnight. We were able to get him a reserve chute container for under seat. I think he ended up using something else because he didn't know we were going to come through to get it done. But screenshot here shows that it did get to him in time. But that's not the kind of stress that you want to go through. Anyways, his first day when he tries to get off the air, a lot of pilots had trouble getting off the air. But the first technical point I want to talk about, that we can learn from in this video is that when you are used to low hang point takeoffs, a lot of pilots, because they don't have movement from the swing arm and how you hold the risers, you're either going to bump the wing to get it up, or some guys would be naughty and they would use engine power to push them forward and get the wing to come up. It's a dangerous technique to use, and basically you think the glider is coming up because the prop is swinging, and it doesn't come up and falls back and the lines hit the prop or get sucked into the prop, and that's how you could get your hands shoved into the cage and you can get hurt. On high hang points, and I'll post a video here of the day just before Zack took off. I did the speedrun cup and my test flight there. I'll show you guys. My engine is off when I do my launches. Sometimes if I know that the conditions are dodgy, you have the possibility of holding the risers forward, and that helps you to get the wing to come up. So with the warp 2, just a little bit of tip on that. With the warp 2, if there's wind, you've got to have a light forward launch. Not try and force it, because if you do that, it might overshoot and it might have a frontal collapse. This is what happened to Zack eventually later on in the race. But his first day, he was stalling the wing constantly because he was used to low hang points and he was using the motor as well. And so he fell on his knees, he hurt his knees, and he had to go to the ENT emergency to get stitches on his knees. So it didn't go too well for him right in the beginning, and that was, sweat in the forehead for everybody, just to know that the only one Nirvana that was going to take part in this event was going to be out before it even started. I talked to him, I sent him some videos, and basically he just saw what he could improve on, and Bob's your uncle, he was off the ground. Tough as he was with his knees bandaged, he got off the ground. But what you can learn from that is the fact that clothes is a very important part of your gear selection. Tactical pants, military tactical pants that has the rubber and the cushioned knee pads that's removable as well. There's tons of different makes, and the military uses them all the time. This is pretty much standard gear where we fly, because here's kudu shit and zebra shit and mole holes and termite mounts. Anything can happen. You can get off your feet and you can get hurt. So the longevity of your career is going to be determined whether your knees survive, right? And you keep your digits, obviously. So, and if you have to swap over to trike because your knees are finished. So take care of your knees, guys. Wear the right pants. Get some tactical pants. That really is a big difference. I'll put a picture up of mine. Then obviously the risers forward. Those are the two things. Then the other thing I want to talk about is that as Zack was flying on his first long leg, he started to get engine problems, developing engine problems, and he had to land on a golf course. And he calls me up at I think it was 12 or 1 a.m. and he asked me, listen, I was starting to lose RPM and I did an engine out on a golf course. And this is something important to learn about the Nirvana. This fuel cap breather system is eons old. It comes back right from the very first Nirvanas made, 15 plus years ago, whatever. It's got a rubber breather valve in it, and so the suction hose from the crankcase is connected to the carburetor, and that causes a vacuum. So you prime the engine, you start the engine, and then because the engine is now running, that vacuum is created and it sucks fuel up from the fuel tank to the carburetor, and that's what keeps the engine going. So if the engine can't breathe and keep an equilibrium inside the fuel tank, the engine will starve, and go, and it'll just die. Okay, so it's very important. What I'm going to be showing you guys now is to make sure that part of your pre-flight checks is to punch something through this little hole over here, maybe a little tool that you can keep in the side pocket. Just make sure, because what happens is, as the fuel spills onto this, if you stored your machine and the fuel was lying on top of this fuel cap, not that that's what happened to him, but he did say that at some points that he had the fuel tank very heavily fueled up, and because he wasn't using that much fuel, flying 2.9 liters an hour, and he had the reserve fuel tank connected, it could have lifted the fuel tank level up and over the fuel cap. This wasn't an issue that I've ever picked up flying this system, because I'm always flying trims open. Zack is a better man than me. He can fly trims closed. I would have just dropped the hammer constantly. It's just the way I am. But so this is important. If you're going to be flying like this, or you're going to have fuel that reaches the fuel cap level, make sure that it's part of your maintenance to keep regular cleaning of this fuel cap. And you do that by just washing it with soap or carb cleaner spray. Make sure that because the fuel can dry up, but the oil is going to keep it sticky. So this is what bit him in the butt there, and he landed. And I told him, to know if it's the fuel cap. If you're flying at normal RPMs and you see the RPM start dropping down and it doesn't want to go higher than 5,000 RPM, and eventually it'll die, that's a fuel cap. That was the issue. All right. Just close this up. Okay. Now, for you guys that are going to buy this system or going to use this system, there's something you got to keep in mind. This is a gravity-fed tank with a reserve fuel bladder being at the top. You could use that fuel bladder, or you can put your camping gear up there. Amazing system there that you got 8 liters of additional space. The fuel line comes down here, and I use the primer bulb, but I also have a valve system. So the valve system, if you're going to connect it to your main fuel line, I'll put the camera over here, you guys can see that. It's connected to the main fuel line, and so this always, the part that's going to connect to your gravity-fed system has got to point, or it's got to be tied down so it can never face upwards, because then bubbles get trapped. And as the suction happens, it sucks the bubbles into the carburetor, and that's when you start developing engine problems, and you will get an engine out, guaranteed. So if I connect it to like this, the fuel starts flowing immediately. You can see the fuel start flowing as a gravity-fed tank. Give it one squeeze there. It's part of the fuel system now. There's no bubbles, and as you prime it out now here, if I just have to prime it a few times here, this is now clean. There's new fuel bubbles. So when you use the main primer on the engine, basically what's going to happen is you're going to push everything out that's still remaining in the fuel system. But overnight, you've got to disconnect this. If you don't disconnect that, it will gravity feed the fuel all night long into the main fuel tank, and it's going to lift the fuel over the fuel cap, and that's where your shit's going to start the next day when you start flying, and you've had that fuel cap exposed to it. This isn't rocket science, guys. It's not extremely difficult to remember to do this. Make it part of your pre-flight checks, and you won't have an issue. Okay, so that didn't happen to Zach because I did warn him about that previously. I just think he was overfilled once or twice on the main fuel tank, and that might have just, and his fuel consumption might not have been high enough, and the gravity fed just maybe lifted it up above the main fuel tank level. It could have happened. All right, so that's one thing we can learn from what happened to him on that. Battery level. Okay, so he was suffering at some point that he was saying that he had an orange light on the throttle. Let me show you that. I'm going to connect my battery. There's two ways for you to know what the battery level is that you are flying with on the F-Lite. Now, first thing is you got a light here. If it's green, it means it's full. If it's orange, it means it's halfway. And if it's red, it means you got about an hour's worth of flying left before the battery's going to die on you. And that's not a guarantee because your battery could be old and that red might be not lasting as long. Second to that, you've got a computer on the F-Lite. It's called the Engadget. And on this, you could see what the battery level is. This one says 12.2, and that could go as high as 12.8. Obviously, I've been doing some flying that still shows a green light. You got your different temperatures in your head and your cylinder. Your head temperature and your exhaust gas temperatures is indicated here, and you have your RPM, and you have your flight leg, your odometer there as well. So you got two ways of determining your battery power. And at some point, he was very nervous because he was going to attempt another 2-hour flight, and it was an orange light. I personally would have done it, but he felt uncomfortable. He's never flown this before. He doesn't know how long it's going to last. And so he was worried about how he's going to get it charged. So having your charger on long cross-country flights is a good thing. But what wasn't in the box was the 220 charger that goes into the wall socket. And that was something that he ordered. And it was another problem that he could have faced. But fortunately, he had a car charger, and he just needed to get hold of a cart in order to charge his battery up. This is supposed to last about 60 starts and hundreds of kilometers of flying. Depends on how fast you fly. I can't give you an exact number because the harder you run the machine, the more spark power it's providing to the engine. And so you can run through this battery quicker sometimes or more than others, depending on what speed and what wing and what else you are flying. But usually this is quite a reliable system. But fly with 2 batteries, it is a good idea. Unfortunately, in Zach's case, it wasn't there. It should have been. All right. What else could we talk about that is important to know? So that was one of the lessons, the fuel cap lesson. In his case, he did charge the battery. He also had a bit of a niggle on the end gadget that went off now and then. I reckon that is just plug related, that the plug had, when the vibration starts kicking in, that the end gadget screen goes off. It doesn't mean your engine goes off. So all you have to do, if you've got to troubleshoot something like this in the air, here's the power on, the master on and off switch. If the screen goes off for some reason, you can switch off the engine. It'll die on you in the air, but then switch it back on, you'll see the the screen come back on. And this is what happened to Zach. He was typing a message to me in the air, asking me what to do, and troubleshooted it that way. And Engadget came back on, and we just wanted to check his max RPM if everything was running smoothly on the engine. If you do, if you're going to buy a brand new Nirvana F-Lite like this, there's something that you do need to be aware about, and that is that after 3 to 5 hours, the ring starts setting. That's only the running period. So in his case, after he blew through a 5-hour flight range, a flight leg, the engine was going to start running rough, and he might not even start. So you've got to lean it out to the correct settings when that happens. There's two settings. There's the low setting and the high setting. The low setting, the engine's got, it just sets the RPM for idle speed and response speed. All right, that's 3,500 RPM and below. The machine idles at 2,450 RPM. Got to idle at that speed. So when you set it on the low setting, it's got to be as smooth as a BMW, and it's got to have quick response. It doesn't have, it shouldn't have a dead spot at all. And then the high setting, you could lean out a tad. And to know if it's right on the F-Lite is that if it's got to give the correct RPM, because we make our propellers. So it's supposed to supply you with 6,800 RPM on the standard 3-blade. It could be 7,200 to 7,500 if you're running the high performance version of the 3-blade. You just put some spaces in. That's for high altitude flying, and then it becomes a 2-blade. That can go up to about 7,500 RPM, and you never exceed 640 degrees on the exhaust gas temperature or 240 degrees on the head temperature. If you don't exceed those temperatures, you won't have an issue. So that's nice to have the Engadget and to be able to implement that kind of control over your out of your aircraft. Okay, so Zach continues on. He punches those long flight legs. He gets pretty much to every checkpoint first, settles in. But the last problem that there was two problems that he dealt with in the rest of the race. One was there was a bit of a misfire happening at RPMs between 6,000 and 5,500 and 6,800, but he was still reaching his max RPM. So when I was doing technical support for him in the air, we could troubleshoot that. If you are keeping your max RPM able in the climb rate and you don't see that constantly dropping, then you know it's not a fuel cap issue. Then it's pretty much just a misfire. It could be just a bad spark plug or something like that. Zach is sending his machine in now for a checkup, and we'll find out what that is in the end. And maybe I'll put that in the comments of this video later on once we know what that is. So it's an easy fix. He still felt confident because he was maintaining high RPMs, and he continued on through the rest. I think he flew another week with it like that and didn't have an issue on that misfire. We'll find out what that misfire is. That is a very uncommon thing. It shouldn't do something like that. Maybe it was a setting on the high. We did play with that at some point. He was on the ground. I was listening to the RPM, and he was tuning it, and we were trying to figure out if that misfire was happening. So yeah, basically in summary, the last thing that he hit as an obstacle was he was trying to launch in gusty, crappy conditions on the Warp 2. Now the only time that the Warp 2 is going to do a frontal collapse with your launch is when you're trying to launch too hard into wind. You've got to have a very slow launch into the wind. Now he says he had his engine on, and he was pulling up the glider in a reverse launch. So it's better to have your engine off with the reverse launch, but he said that the engine was not running 100% perfect at that point on the idle speed, and that means he didn't have the right setting on the low. It's always supposed to run smooth, low setting. It's something that he'll learn over time as he uses the machine, but he felt more comfortable keeping the machine on. But it should have been enriched a little bit more so that the engine doesn't want to die or doesn't have a response, like I explained a bit earlier. And so when he turned around, he had a frontal collapse and the wing went into the prop and he hurt the wing. And so he was able to borrow a wing from another buddy and finish the Wingman challenge, which I'm very fortunate and very grateful to the guy that borrowed him that wing. But so yeah, so if something like the Warp 2 is launched too hard forward, it will give you a frontal collapse, and that could just be dangerous because those lines slack up and they can get near the prop. Guys, that's all I can pretty much share from what Zack's experience was, but I do want to talk just a couple of minutes on some of the other videos that I've seen. I'm going to post some of these clips that I've seen, is that the guys were really overloading their gliders. We've seen those, free rides and things like that, overloaded, and guys running for hundreds of meters to get airborne. The danger is not about whether the guys, there's two dangers. Maybe you keep on ground rolling until you hit an obstacle because you're not able to get airborne. And number two, what happens if you have an engine out while you're doing that incredible ground roll speed that the wing just doesn't want to get airborne? That is where people get hurt, because you're carrying fuel bladders and weird stuff and whatever else, and you're hitting the speed at 60 kilometers an hour. You're going to hit the ground. Your feet's not going to catch up, no matter how much brake you're going to give, and you plow. I've seen this happen so many times, and almost with every video that I make, I try and explain that this is a bad thing. Don't overload your gliders. And so it's overloading the wing is an extremely bad idea, because you are going to be creating a situation where you're going to have ground roll. Now, what do I mean with ground roll is that you need a lot more speed, and the air cushion has to grow underneath the wing, and as you get positive lift rotation speed, then you start lifting off the ground. When you overload the wing, it's the same problem that airline captains worry when they check in the baggage and they want to make sure that you're under a certain weight, because they can only load so much weight on that plane before they're going to run out of runway and get into trouble. Same thing, same principle. Don't overload your glider. If you do, you are asking for trouble. Now you're going to say to me, yeah, but these guys did get off the ground. All right, they did. But what happens if you have an engine out as you get off the ground? I have a personal friend that does slalom racing that had an engine out right after getting off the ground with that 303 heavy machine on his back. And when he came down like a meteorite. By all definition, you're a meteorite. You don't have flare capability, and you're going to hit the ground at freaking Mach 1. And so he busted his knee up pretty badly. So I'm telling you guys, having engine outs at that tremendous amount of ground roll speed is pretty much the very worst situation that you could face in PPG, unless you're flying into an obstacle. So don't overload. Fly within the weight category, and this is what Zack did right. He bought the right size glider. He knew what his all-up weight was beforehand. We went through it. We did the calculations. He did the calculations, and we felt comfortable that on that Warp 220 was the right weight range for him. And that it was incredible. He did extremely well. If you look at his videos for takeoff, he never struggled. It really did look extremely good. Even at those altitudes, we were talking about, 7,000 feet, etc., where he was taken off. Sometimes he had to run a bit, but it's not a ground roll run. It's an altitude air density issue. All right, so that's the one thing. The second thing is mobility. I can see from all those, if you're going to, some of the guys end up, you start off with a 50, let's say a 60-pound machine. In this case, this machine weighs dry about 48 to 50 pounds. Now you're loading up the fuel, and you're getting in your reserve chutes, and you're putting up all your camp gear, and you're doing all the stuff that you're going to start adding on, and eventually you get to some of the weights that I saw. There was 115 pounds of carrying, on the back. Some of those scouts was 115 pounds. I've actually seen some numbers of 200 pounds. I don't know how true that is. If you're going to do something like this on the Polini 202, you're going to have a tremendous amount of weight on your back with the fuel and everything else that you have on your back. So that means that you have to be a physically big, strong person to be able to take that weight. I weighed over, probably around 350 pounds or something for my Icarus, one or two of my Icarus races, and that was an extremely stupid thing to do. And that's part of the evolution of why we created this, was the constant pressure from us cross-country pilots to say that we need to reduce the weight but increase the performance so that we have easier cross-country adventures with this. This is part of the design, part and parcel why this machine has become so light. This is our premier pick, is the power to weight ratio increases, and you're not that heavy for takeoff. All right, so in the case of the carrying the weight, you'll see that some of these pilots are extremely heavy. When they're trying to pull away, they have to use the engine power to get moving because they've got their bags and they've got everything, and it's difficult to move off the ground. It's difficult to get off the ground. And that, if something goes wrong, you step in a hole or whatever else, you're going to go over. And you also, not everybody is a ultra marathon runner, so they run out of steam with 1 or 2 failed attempts if the conditions are bad, and then they go sit down for 20 minutes, and then they're going to try again. Personally, even as fit as I was for the Icarus, I had, with that amount of weight on my back and the weight I had 2 or 3 attempts in the middle of the day, and it was just so hot, 30 degrees plus. It killed me. So I would have to sit down and wait it out until I can feel that I've got enough strength to get back into it. So weight is all about it. Keep yourself light. Make sure that the gear that you're traveling with doesn't include the freaking kitchen sink. Make sure that you're on the lightest possible gear that you're carrying. And having a machine that's got a great power to weight ratio is what you want. But hand in hand with that formula goes the physical weight. No matter how big you are, let me tell you one secret. Most instructors will tell you that. The first guy that will bitch about weight is the biggest guy that he carries on his weight. A small guy puts a machine on his back. I can put a 40-kilo machine when I go to events and things like that. It's always the biggest guy that complains about, oh, this thing is so heavy. The small guys always have this attitude of, I can do this, I can do this. So you're telling me that you're going to be fine with a heavy payload of a 200-pound payload on your back if you're a big guy. It's still going to weigh heavy on your shoulders. And so try and reduce the weight. Get the weight down. Pick the brands that are going to give you a lighter package, and pick a wing that can be within the weight range, and you'll be able to sort yourself out there to a large degree. Now, what happens if you've overloaded that wing as well is now you're flying at altitude and it becomes hot and the air density drops. So what happens is that your trim's closed and you're running your machine at full power because you're still thinking that this is going to work for you, but it doesn't. It's not. You're going to start losing altitude. Trim's closed, even you're going to lose altitude because the motor just can't keep up. You're running 2 risks there. You're either going to seize the engine because you're maintaining that extremely high RPM on a pure combustion engine and has no stoppages that's going to save your ass. Okay? So I'm referring to pure combustion engine. I don't want to brand name all the time, but a Mosta is a pure combustion engine. It doesn't have stoppages or safety features that's going to stop you from seizing it. You just look at the incidences and the incident record of the Wingman Challenge, and you'll see what I mean with outages that happened. I'm not bad-mouthing it. I'm saying is that they have to reach in the high setting in order to make sure that it's well lubricated enough so it doesn't go down, so you don't have a seize. All right. And to get more power, you have to lean it, but that's taking a chance, because if you're maintaining power and you're leaning and running on that lean setting for too long because you're overloaded on the glider, you get the seize. So I do understand why Vitarazi tries to seal that high setting that you can't set it. They are trying to build in their own manual form of safety features so that you don't seize it. On the Nirvana, we don't have that issue because we get feedback from the computer, and as long as the temperatures don't flow over 640 degrees, you can lean it out, you can do what you need. There's standard settings given to you that you can play with. And if you get to 640, you can pull back on the power. But the way that you are going to determine if the size glider is the right size for you for a cross-country flight is you've got to go full trims out with your machine, with your full payload, full fuel, and you can maintain altitude, and you need positive climb rate. Just remember that. So I do these tests all the time to make sure that I stay within the margins of safety. And in actual fact, I'm a 190-pound guy, and with my machine fully loaded, I've got positive climb rate on full speed bar, 89 kilometers an hour with this machine. Full disclosure, I'm not running a standard prop, and that does make a difference. It's part of the development of what we're doing, and Zack did not have access to that technology yet. Okay. All right, so that was the overloading side, which I think is something that's very important to talk about, and the physical weight, the way you put your gear together, and being able to move that weight on the ground is very important. And having enough power to pull that weight on the ground, very important. So guys, I'm breaking this up into a part 1, part 2. I hope that it's given enough information on what I've seen on the videos. I wasn't there. I didn't do it myself. So don't give me crap about the fact that I didn't do it. I've done 3 Icarus races. They're all pretty much the same kind of conditions. Everybody has engine outs. Everybody's, you know, not everybody, but there's a lot of seizures that happen on something like the Icarus races. So it happens. And what I want to say to everybody that's been on there, that's watching this video, I want to say, I tip my hat to every single person that was willing to take on the chance to do an adventure like this. They're amazing people. They're the best among us because they're brave and they fly. When you fly across the horizon, you don't know what's waiting on the other side. Now just imagine a couple of horizons past that. You have no idea even what the weather's doing on that side of it. So wind, weather, rotor, high temperatures, anything can hit you. And the bravery and the knowledge that you build by doing all this stuff is absolutely fantastic. So my hat's off to all of you guys, no matter whether you had problems or didn't have problems, or overloaded or not overloaded, whatever you did, hats off to you. You're the best among us. And I hope you guys enjoyed my feedback on some of the stuff that we've seen with Zack happening, some of the technical points that I've addressed on it, and some of what I've seen on it. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be seeing you on the next one. Wait, so there's one more thing that Zack wanted to share, and that is his crash landing about 200 miles from the finish. Now, what happened was he came in on a very strong wind landing and got pulled over when he was flying the Luna 2, the BGD Luna 2, and basically got dragged in a turtle position. And what impressed him most was once he got himself unhooked from the machine and got back up, he found that the damage was minimal. But watch the clip and just, it's insane that the machine survived that and he was able to complete the race with minimal damage. All right, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Oh no. Come on. No! Okay. I'm fucked. I'm fucked. I'm so fucked. Get up.